Well, thank you to the BIC for giving us this incredible opportunity of watching these terrific films of Bimal Roy and, of course, watching the documentary and for being able to be in conversation with Joy Bimal Roy. It's almost unbelievable, actually, to be in conversation with Bimal Roy's son. And congratulations on the documentary.
Thank you.
It's always special watching it on a big screen. It's never quite the same thing watching it on your laptop screen, right? Um, that's such a poetic, beautiful, moving ending. And I'm sure a lot of people in the audience were transported back to the time of what one might actually call real cinema. My apologies for saying this, but I do think it is a special time in film history, and watching films on celluloid is an experience that just can't be matched with, by digital cinema. There will be people who might have a difference of opinion. So let me start by saying, so the format we're going to follow is that we are going to have a conversation for about 30 minutes, I'm
30
told.
minutes.
Yes.
Seen the film for
I'm
one
told that
hour.
you have a lot to say. So, and then we open it out to the audience. So those of you who have questions or comments or just want to share your memories of watching some of these films, please do so. So, I was thinking of there's a number of films being made on filmmakers by their kids. Now, it's like almost a genre that I've been noticing.
Really?
Yeah. Um, One that I can name is a film on Sukhdev, who was a films division filmmaker, and his daughter made a film recently. It's called The Final Ado. A very moving film again. So I was wondering, because this film tells us a lot about Bimal Roy, the filmmaker. So my first question to you is, what was it like making the film for you, directing the film?
Very cathartic, actually, because I didn't really know my father. He died when I was just about to turn 11. And in a way, I think this film was a search for him because, I'd seen the films, so I knew him as a filmmaker, but I wanted to know what he was like as a man, as seen through the eyes of people who had worked with him. So it was very moving to be interviewing these people who had actually worked with him, spent time with him. So
Yeah, and did you ever struggle with decisions around how much of the personal person within the domestic space to bring in versus Bimal Roy as a filmmaker?
no, actually, I had very limited footage of personal footage. So I didn't have much of a choice in that sense. But I did have a lot of choice where it came to the film themselves. So the selection of maybe scenes or whatever um, was difficult. But if you follow a certain logic, then they have to connect with the commentary or the thing. So therefore, it's always an illustration of whatever is being said. So again, the choices were limited. So in many ways, I would like to think that it's a logical film. It follows a certain logic. So
So, I mean, when I was watching the scenes from Sujata, where there's a commentary around how the movement of the leaves,
yes,
and I
yeah,
think Vaijanti Mala says it's poetry on
that's
celluloid,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And it really is like you're struck by the balance
yeah,
of within the frame of how
yeah.
much is to the left, how much is to the right. So when you were making the film and as you were rewatching the films, did you sort of have your own interpretation or memories associated with any of these films that you have used footage from?
I think personal memory only of Sujata because part of that song was shot in our garden. So I remember that. And the song Nanhi Kali, I went for the recording with my mother. And what Kamini Kaushal said about shooting at the time of the whatever the scene was meant to be. So I remember it was a late night recording. And I remember falling asleep on my mother's lap. So obviously the lullaby was effective. It did work.
Right. And I also have a copy of the book, book edited by your sister
Okay.
on Bimal Roy. And, it's very interesting to read the number of essays in it,
Yeah,
including the
yeah,
first opening one by Mashweta Devi, of
yeah,
course.
yeah.
And to actually get a perspective of how he was viewed very differently by so many people, right?
Right.
So maybe you could share a little bit about the kind of, I mean, one thing that comes out persistently is his quiet demeanor, his ability to
Yes.
get from his actors what he really wants without too much of conversation. And I was
Right.
watching something, interview by Nutan,
Hmm.
uh, and I mean, I have to say that Sujata and Bandhani are some of my favorite films, Bandhani in particular.
Right.
And she talks about how there was very little instruction given,
Yeah.
and how she didn't want to do kind of, takes before the final
Yeah.
take,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Rehearsals.
Yes.
So I'm maybe you want to talk a little bit about his style of direction with his actors and with his crew, if you had any kind of experience.
Experience?
Yeah.
No. First of all, my father didn't want us to have anything to do with the film world. So I actually don't. I did go to. My sister's here actually, so they were mad fans of Shashi Kapoor, but they weren't supposed to go to the set. So I was made the excuse that I wanted to see Shashi Kapoor. Total lie, but anyway. So that's how we sneaked into Prem Patra, and I was dead bored because it was a hospital scene, and the same thing kept getting shot. And he has bandages around his eyes, and Sadhna's there, and it was really boring. So that was when I was very small. So I don't really no. We didn't go on to the sets. I don't remember anything. No.
So when you grew up, when you got older, and you kind of realized that my father is this amazing filmmaker, what was that rediscovery of Bimal Roy for you? How was that process of, I mean, you knew him as your father.
When I was in school, I didn't know that my father made films. He was like a father. He went to work. I didn't know what he did. But it was the other kids, who kind of brought it to my attention that my father was a little different from other fathers. So, and he died too early for me to even realize. So the first film actually, I saw Dobiga Zameen for the first time after he died. And that's why it's very painful memory, because it's a very sad film. And so uh, I would say the sensitivity of and the way that he dealt with characters, the very nuanced characterization of was apparent, and anybody who sees it would realize that. So it was not any special realization, but yeah, I mean, for example, as you grew older, I used to admire the script of Madhumati because it's got twists and turns, and even though it's a suspense film and you find out, at the end, the end.
It's Ghatak's script, right?
Yes, Ghatak's story. Even though you know the end, you still can watch the film. That's why many people watch it over and over again. And that, I think, is a real feat, for that to happen. So I guess that he understood the medium so well that he actually could. It was like a toy, it was it's almost like a pliant thing that he would play with, and because he knew what would emerge finally. He had that vision. So you can see from the films that the beginning, middle, end, the way that the progression takes place, very carefully thought out.
So he worked with perhaps two of the most remarkable studios in India,
Yes.
Bombay Talkies and New Theatres. So can you maybe talk a little bit about what is it that got him interested in films in the first place?
Well, actually, it's there in the film because he apparently wanted to act. So, but he obviously, it didn't work. So Nitin Bose told him that since, why don't you, are okay with the still camera, why don't you join the camera department? But I believe he was interested in theater when he was younger. Um, I don't know, maybe it was, he just lucked out. Like he found the right thing to do. And therefore, I always believe that unless you excel in something, or rather, only if you love something, you can excel in it, passion. So I guess he had that. There was a passion in him.
I mean, I suppose I'm asking this question because I'm interested in early cinema and I've done some work on it, and it's kind of fascinating how this new medium comes into the country, and
Yes.
then you have like this large number of people who are incredibly talented but come from such a differing kind of class spectrum in society, right? And how the industry actually manufactures itself, beginning in Calcutta and then, of course, very soon after in
Also,
Bombay.
he saw the advent of sound, even though he joined, he joined around that time, 32, I think was around the time that he joined New Theatres, but 35 was his first independent film. So, it was like a whole changeover. And the other changeover, of course, that I think I don't know if he could have, of course, he would have if he had to, but to change from black and white to color, that would have been quite a traumatic transition, I'm sure. But he was spared that because last film was Bandini and then he passed away.
So, right. So I suppose, I mean, one of the other things that's been commented upon in the film and has been written about also widely are the two migrations.
Yes.
Can you talk about? We can see how the effect plays out in films, and it was mentioned that there's a river in the presence of the river in many of his films. But for you and for maybe the larger family as well, how does this kind of twice over migration play out in the larger scheme of
Well,
things?
I was lucky. I was born in Bandra and I've lived in Bandra all my life. So there's been no migration at all. But my father's migration from Bangladesh was traumatic. It had nothing to do with partition. So they had an estate manager, and I believe my grandfather and his brother used to play chess all day, little like Shatranj ke khiladi. And so when my grandfather died, the estate manager announced that he had made the property over to his name and that they had no home of their own. So overnight, my grandmother and the three youngest sons had to move to Calcutta for work. So that's why his hatred for property. You know that story that Mr. Shah says, he never wanted to buy, he was perfectly happy staying in a rented place. He felt that property, whatever, brought, what should I say? What would the word be? Not sadness, bad luck, I don't know, to the family.
And then the migration to Bombay as well, right?
Migration to Bombay was a happy one, I think, because New Theatres was not doing well. And being invited by Devika Rani and Ashok Kumar, of course, Devika Rani had left by that time. I believe she exited around 1945. So Ashok Kumar was looking after the thing. So I think that was a prestigious thing to come for that. And I guess it was a happy experience because he decided to stay back. I think it coincided with him also getting two offers. So it became back to back. There was a Bab Beti and Parinita. All happened around 53. So he was very prolific. He could make two films in a year. I don't know how he managed, but that's another thing. What I was told is that, what Navindu Ghosh told me is that he had two teams. Like one team was working on the next film, the script, while one film was being shot. So by the time the previous film got ready and was released, he was already ready to shoot the next one. So that's why he could make at least one film a year. He died when he was 54. So, and the remarkable body of work that he's left is, in terms of the sheer number of films, is quite remarkable.
Yeah, it is remarkable. So, in terms of the material that he's left, you have the prints and the
Actually, we have nothing now because we've given everything to the film archives. Because
NFA.
to maintain, but things are very, in fact, very difficult right now because the NFI is no longer the NFI, it's become the NFDC. And we got a taste of that for this particular thing because they've started demanding money, which they never did earlier. You know, they would give the films, if it was a film society or a free screening, there was no payment except for the transport charges. They wanted 10,000 per film, but thanks to, I think, the intervention, we've appealed to Bhavesh, who's the person in charge of the library, and they waived the fees, which is very kind of them. But the very fact that they've turned commercial is, I think, thanks to the fact that they are no longer NFAI, they're NFDC.
Yeah, and I think for those who may not be aware of some of these changes, there have been a lot of modifications, both in film legislation as well as film governance, that have been brought in over the last couple of years. So the Film Appellate Tribunal has been scrapped. So there's nowhere that a filmmaker can go to appeal on a case to do with censorship, other than to the court, which means it's years and years and years before anything happens, right? And the National Film Archive of India, which is our public heritage, which should be open to people and so on, is no longer doing that. So I think we are actually in a state of minor crisis, if I may say so, vis-a-vis our film history, because we actually don't know 5 years or 10 years later if we will have access to our own film history.
Yes, they're making, no, they made it difficult. In fact, you know, I have to say that there is a company called Criterion Collection, which is in America. They have they have taken on 4 films which they are restoring at their cost. But to get those films, they had to pay a lakh and something per film to take it out of NFAI. At that time, it was still NFAI, which is absurd. When they're our own films and we're asking for the films to be restored, there was no point in charging that much. Then they demand a copy as well of the thing. So it's
Yeah, so if any of your writers and you feel that this is cause for concern, please do consider taking this up as an issue, because it is a real issue facing filmmakers as well as people who do research on film histories. And it's a real crisis. In addition to the fact that films are burnt and destroyed, and
copyright is also a big issue because of the number of years. So our films are in a very gray area. We don't know whether there's the copyright has become and gone into the public domain. So, for example, Shemaru had the rights and they're still exploiting them. So they said that, well, we can do it because it's now in the public domain. But at the same time, Criterion Collection paid us. If it is really in the public domain, then they wouldn't have paid either. So there's a bit of an anomaly here, Yeah. People take advantage of situations like this, actually.
yeah. And I suppose it's a good time to also mention that the photo exhibition that's
Yes, I have to say that this is a milestone for us in terms of the fact that for the first time in my life, at least, is that my mother and father are both getting equal billing in BIC. My mother was one of the earliest known photographers of India, and her photographs are upstairs on the second floor, and on the ground floor, we are seeing my father's work. So I think it's absolutely, I'm very grateful to BIC for this opportunity. I never thought that it would happen, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's really, really so special.
it is indeed. I mean, it really is.
How many people have mothers and fathers who are both? Yes? Oh, the photo exhibition. Yes, yes. Yeah. Thank you.
So maybe now is a good time, since
I beg your pardon? Yes.
yeah, maybe now is a good time to open it out, because I think people have
Yeah, and this
either
we're getting
seen.
on in time.
Yeah. So if there's a mic to pass around. Okay, okay. If ma'am, would you mind?
That's a little much, no? Maybe
Okay.
won't there be another mic? We can share one mic, no, Rashmi? Yeah. Okay, one second. Fine, that's good. Right.
Sir, it was very, yeah, yeah. It was very nice to see the documentary and you present here.
Thank you.
There are a couple of questions from my end.
Yes.
One is, if you remember anything during your father era time, any actor wanted to work with him, or he wanted to work any particular actor who got missed for any other reasons?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
No,
Any actor who?
whom your father wanted to work with,
Huh.
or vice versa, which got missed for any some reasons. Do you remember any of those kind?
No, I can't think of anyone. My father worked with people he wanted to work with, in the sense that, for example, for casting of Devdas, I mean, there was many choices, but ultimately he stuck to his guns. He wanted Suchitra Sen, he got Suchitra Sen. There were, I believe, Nimi was considered, Nargis was considered, he rejected everyone. So he had a very definite view of who was suitable for the role. So I'm sure that there were actors and actresses who wanted to work with him. But I think in his lifetime, maybe he worked with the people he wanted to work with. For example, Nutan got 2 films, and Dilip Kumar got 3 films, because I think that he was comfortable working with them. So I wouldn't know. I'm not qualified to answer that. I wish I knew.
I think, yeah.
I wanted to ask you, is that you or your sister, other siblings, you all never thought of entering this line, direction or production
No.
or lyrics?
I didn't, even though I worked with Sham Benegal for 3 years assisting him. I think there was a real fear of being compared with my father. And I never felt that I could match up to that standard. And I set very high standards for myself. So unless I feel I can do it, I would never do it. So I didn't really want to make a film, because I really was, I mean, I have to confess, I was afraid. That's the only reason. It was fear. Fear of failure. I think many people have fear of failure, but here it was like an unfair comparison now when I think that, everybody has to be true to themselves. So I think because the expectations were there, filmmaking is not hereditary. It's not like, it's not like just because your father is a filmmaker, you have to become a filmmaker, or it's in your blood or your genes or whatever. I'm not sure it's like that. But at the age of 68, I finally written a book, which was released on 2nd of September. So, what should I say? One has to find oneself, or so I
We'd
don't
like
think.
we'd like more people from the Bombay industry to think that way too.
But I did make this film. So, in that sense, I have made a film. I made a couple of other short films too. But yeah, they say one swallower doesn't a summer make. So when I say I've made one film, I don't call myself a filmmaker. It was like,
But I must confess that this has come out very, very well. And yesterday I felt very proud to see your mother's
thank you
photography,
so much.
etc.
Thank
And
you.
trust me, most of us, we didn't know that she was such a good photographer. Another thing is that some of the classics like Parnita, Viraj Bahu, Naukri, etc., we have not seen. And some of us hardcore Bimal Das fans, we really long to see. I really wonder how we can see. I keep a
Well,
track in the Doordarshan, but they have not been showing.
no. I think all the films are actually available on YouTube, because Shemaru put everything on YouTube, and they had all the films. So they're still available on, now you can watch YouTube on TV. So I think you could just look for it, you'll find the films. They'll be available.
Okay,
I don't
thank
know
you.
about the quality.
Okay.
Back in the day when NFAI was actually doing its job, and if anyone went to Pune, it was a treat to actually watch it there, the print. I think ma'am there has been wanting to say something for a long
Yes.
time. Yeah.
All I said then was I saw your mother's photographs
Yes.
yesterday, and she, the, her sister too.
Yes, twin.
They were twins, yes,
Yes,
just a few
yes.
hours apart.
Yeah.
And the photographs are so beautiful and so Calcutta, so Bengali. You know, it gives the entire ambience of family life, of what was important, uh, what everybody else felt was important for the family. Those are the photographs that have been taken. Being
Thank
a
you so
Bengali
much.
myself and coming from a Bengali home, and one could immediately connect with what the photograph was trying to say. But fantastic work. And to
Thank
think
you.
that they got a camera at the age of 12 and they went on clicking.
Well, yeah, I mean, for those who don't know, it was actually my grandfather was one of the most progressive men I can imagine. He had no sons, but he treated his daughters like sons. They never felt second to anyone, definitely not any man, that's for sure. So he gifted them a camera when they were 12. He made a dark room for them. He even taught them how to develop their own, photographs. And they began to win awards before my mother got married when she was 17. But before that, she'd already won awards. Do you know, I discovered that my mother was one of India's earliest known women photographers 2 years after she passed away. She never mentioned it. We didn't know. As I said, I didn't know what my father did, and I thought all mothers take photographs. I had no clue, that it was. Yeah, I mean, there's a book called Chobitola by Siddharth Ghosh, I think some historian, about women photographers of India. And that's the first time that somebody gave us that book and we saw their names there. And I was stunned. I mean, I thought to myself, this is amazing. Anyway, her first exhibition was 18 years after she passed away.
My God.
And it was the year of her 100th year, her birth anniversary. So I thought that you say better late than never, but I thought maybe it was appropriate that it happened on the centenary year. And since then, we've had exhibitions in Bombay, Calcutta twice, Delhi, Hyderabad, Lucknow, and now in Bangalore. So
And I
it's
must tell everyone, please go and see those photographs. They are brilliant. There's no other word for it.
Well, you're on the ground floor. All you need to do is to go to the second
Second
floor in
floor.
the lift. And that's where so please do.
There's a question here.
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you. I've been a Bimal Roy fan since I was a child, and it was just wonderful getting this peek into his life, into his work, especially from the words of other stars. I had a question about what Kamini Kaushal also talked about, and so did you, about how all the shades of grey were planned. It was crafted in a way by the choice of other colors, that is, the choice of whatever props and items in the sets were chosen with the idea that light would reflect in a certain manner and the grey would emerge according to the palette that he wanted. With this background, what do you think about the recent trend towards colorizing old black and white films? Because I've always felt, for example, that brilliant shot of Nutan and Bandini where she's in the prison yard, and that song is being sung, her sari is black and white, the entire jail scene is black and white. I'm wondering what colors were originally there, and would he have wanted those colors to emerge through colorization?
I really don't know, but one thing about colorization would be that the younger generation would be more open to watching it because they find black and white difficult to watch. And color is natural because that's the way we see the world. But for example, my father grew up with black and white photography. I don't think, I'm not It's a good question because, for example, Hollywood was making color from the 40s onwards. So there was a comparison. Who knows? I don't know whether. I wonder what colors he would have used. It's interesting, but he was a very aesthetic man, but very minimal. So he dressed all his life in black and white or beige or gray. He never used any, he never wore any colors. So in a way, he was living out his own films. It was all black and white and gray, you know. I don't think he would have made films in color somehow. Personally, I don't think that he could have made that transition happily. He probably would have made it if he had to. But I have to say one thing that, you know, his cameraman, Kamal Bose, who shot Bandini, and I think Bandini is probably one of the most beautiful black and white films in terms of even framing, and he transited to color to the extent he used to shoot Firoz Khan's films. And he shot Aprad, and he shot films which were like car races somewhere. And, you know, it's amazing that he made the transition so beautifully. So it's possible. It's possible.
I think that's a really interesting
Yes.
question, comment, because you know this same kind of dilemma was faced by filmmakers with the transition to sound, because naturally the world is full of sound as well, right? But film was a medium that was seen as something that was violated with the entry of sound, and so to the entry of color in some sense. So yeah, I think, but and increasingly now it's not actually what color your eye sees or what sound, but it's a augmented, you know, it's that hyper blue green, which is not the natural eye thing anyway, and it's Dolby, which is not how our ears hear. So it's like that movement from absence of sound and absence of color to like a
Yeah.
hyper real sound color thing. So I think it's very
I think also that, yeah.
yeah.
What if he chose a really Rani pink color curtain? Because in black and white, with the light, it would show as a certain shade of gray. He might not have wanted a colorized version of that film. I'm just hypothesizing here that when we look back at old black and white films, and we may not be doing them justice by using, whatever the kind of spectrography they do to make it colored now. So I was just wondering whether they would look as beautiful as they
I
do in.
I I think that different colors translated into different colors, meaning rather he knew which color would, he knew the effect that he wanted, and he would use that color. Because I remember Mrs. Salil Chaudhary reminiscing about, so when she got married, they had no home when they first came, and they stayed in what is called my father had an editing room, which was like a bungalow, and apparently they stayed there, and she watched Do Biga Zameen being shot. And apparently he was wearing an orange dhoti. So she wondered why, and then she realized that he wanted it to look soiled or dirty. It must have been pale, it couldn't have been dark. But yeah, so I guess they did use color, but for effect, and he knew which color would produce what on the screen. So yeah, I'm sure that watching the shoot maybe would have been a pleasure, because everybody must have been wearing coordinated stuff or what, I'm sure. Yeah.
So certain
Good-
party
good
has a
journey.
good color consultant to know what is soiled.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Comments?
Now with the age of television,
Asia?
now with the age of television, the color TV is a lot more popular than the black and white.
Yeah, of course, naturally.
So yes, because I think it's easy on the eye, and also it's not monotonous in certain ways. It's really an art lover who looks out for fantastic, sharp images in a black and white and appreciates that. But how many of us are really so deeply into analyzing what we are seeing pictorially? You know, it's more the story, it's more the movement, it's more the song
True.
and dance.
Yeah.
You know, so that's
You're right.
where your grandfather wins is his music. It's beautiful. Every time it's so fantastic. I mean, I'd go back to seeing the movies more for the music than maybe even, the scenes or the actors and actresses. So that's really how.
There's one thing very interesting, and what you said reminded me of something. There are people who don't know the name Bimal Roy, But they connect to a song. They go to a picnic and they'll sing Suhana Safar, right? So when I talk to people like that, I said, "You remember Suhana Safar?" She said, "Yes." I said, "That song is from my father's film." So then they connect. It's like there are songs which even I think this is the one which is, and then the birthday song, Tum Jio Hazaro Sal.
Yes.
All birthdays people sing that song
Yes.
without knowing from which film it is.
His music was
So the
absolutely
music
fabulous.
actually stands apart. It's got a life of its own
Yes,
in many
absolutely.
ways. Yeah.
Lady,
Joy,
Yeah.
can I say something?
Yes.
Which is, in connection with this thing of colorization. There were so many demands to colorize Madhumati.
Yeah.
So many distributors offered tons of money, but we put our foot down because we can't see that film in color.
No.
So,
I personally,
that's what I'm saying.
I would never,
Never.
ever encourage colorization of any of the films. It would
Yeah.
be travesty, I think.
Yeah.
And also, I wouldn't be able to bear the colors, in the sense, the wrong colors. It
Yeah.
would have been, I
Yeah.
would have had to sit personally and supervise which color goes with which color, which I'm not willing to do. So that's
And that dhoti that you mentioned,
Ah.
that was dipped in tea water overnight.
okay.
So
But
that, it gave it.
she thought it's orange.
No.
I interviewed her. She said it was orange. I'm a
No,
little taken
no.
aback.
It was slightly, that
Soil.
tish color. Okay, okay.
yeah, this question.
So delightful afternoon. I just wondered, I'm here, Joyce. I just wondered, like, when you started making this film, apart from the proximity of the fact that he's your father, what was the kind of material that you started looking for? Archival material, diaries, possible letters, letters that others may have written to him and your mum may have kept. And, so basically written material from which you could look at,
I didn't
take out
actually
more.
look. I looked only for footage which I could. So there was some home footage which I found, which has been used, and this entire portion of him is actually from a films division film, which was this whole delegation went to Moscow. That's including Raj Kapoor and Nargis, and so all that is from there. So I really didn't need to look further. For my purpose, this was enough. So written material, there are lots of letters, fan letters, etc. But somebody once told me that there's no conflict in this film. So I said I can't create conflict. If everybody says something nice about my father, that's not my fault. I mean, in the sense that how am I going to find somebody who says just manufacture something for the sake of conflict? It's not that kind of. So maybe it's called a hagiography or something like that. Something that's all praise. But unfortunately or fortunately, that's what I got from everyone. So that's what happened.
No, I was only saying it to have understood the man more because he was so silent. And all you saw was the final product of the film.
yeah.
So, some of the questions that have come up, could he have done that? Could he have liked that? What were his views? Color was already there. Did he feel,
Who knew?
So I was just thinking that
But there's
letters on that.
only one thing where, Sharmishta shows, those are the sketches that her father did for the Madhumati sets. So there was some record of something in the past. By the way, I want to introduce, please stand up, Bo. That's Salil Chaudhary's granddaughter, Vasundhara. So she's a painter. She lives in Bangalore. And yeah, okay.
But did he write a diary? Did he keep a diary?
No, not at all. No diary. No diary at all.
Material from the production?
No.
No.
There was a handwritten script which I'm not sure he wrote, but there was a script of Amrit Kumbhe Shandane which Gulzar kept. He didn't give back, but I believe that was something my father worked on. So that was one thing that we didn't get. Yeah. Anyway. Yes, Lekha?
We have time for two more questions. Somebody who hasn't, give us a second, somebody who hasn't already.
See at the back, so if somebody's raising their hand, we won't know
Yeah.
from here.
No?
Anyone? Yeah.
once again, it's more than question. Since Madam also bought and you also bought related to that archives restoration, we have also seen from last 1 year. I don't know how the model it is. Film Heritage Foundation, one of they screened Amitabh retrospective, Dilip Kumar subs, and last month Devanand subs across tie-up with PVR. So going forward, we would like to see Bimal's stars also work in those way in big screen like that.
Oh.
We wish it should happen. I
Well,
don't know how the modalities.
you're going to see, if you stay back, then you'll see one film this evening, and tomorrow you can see three.
I mean, across the what I meant to say is they released in PVR tie-ups. Whatever I'm saying, in that way, we would like to see.
So, sir, you're going to get to see them without buying a ticket.
Yeah.
No, okay. Big screen. I mean, in
Screening
restoration.
the film PVR. I don't think that's going to happen. Unless, okay, it will happen. No, Criterion Collection will release it in theaters, but not in India. But they show the film. So that's Bandini, Madhumati, Devdas, and Dobiga Zameen. They haven't taken Sujata, but these 4 films will be seen in the US and hopefully they have other countries, UK, US, etc. The first time I think that my father's films will be shown. My father was, for example, Ray made films which are far more acceptable to the West. And my father used the idiom of Hindi cinema with songs, with dances, etc. So I don't think he was ever considered to be in the same class as Ray by the West. But it's a validation that a company like Criterion Collection, which has films of Ray and Kurosawa, etc., are finally taking my father's film. So I think that's a great step, that it's a huge step forward for us. Yes?
Make one more Bengali film?
No.
Or was he making Bengali films in Hindi language?
No. I have your question reminds me of something. I have a very well-known filmmaker nephew called Anik Dotto, who makes only Bengali films. And he kind of commented, and it was an observation which was quite significant, was that my father he took Bengal to the nation. He made films in Hindi, but he based all his films in Bengal, except for Yahudi and Madhumati. The rest of them are all set in Bengal with Bengali characters, and that was a first. I don't think that any other director, even a Bengali, has ever done that. Like Shakti Samant, Pramod, they made a few. Pramod Chakravarti, no. Shakti Samant, yes, a few. But yeah, so he was consistent. I mean, he was a Bengali at heart, and he remained a Bengali always. So I think it was not important that the characters didn't speak in Bengali. They were Bengali, so it was quite apparent. Except that Bengali speak very bad Hindi. And, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I think regarding the colorization of films, the black and white films have their own impact. The emotion is carried through the black and white films, which is now totally lost in a color film. There's no emotion involved. The stark grays, blacks and whites, there's still their own story. In a color film, we just pass it on. It's present to the eye, but there's no impact on the eye.
Really? You think so?
No, it moves you as something attractive, but the depth of emotion is not carried there.
Really, that's very interesting. Why do you think that black and white carries more emotion?
Because the stark difference between the black and the white.
Okay. Yeah, characters, that's true. It's like, the good and evil. Like evil is black and good is white. So it's almost like that stark drama. Everybody wears black and is evil, and whoever wears white is good. It's an interesting.
It's obvious the need for words in a conversation. See, the shades of grey tells you a story by itself.
Yeah.
You don't need to put any dialogue there.
True. Very interesting. Thank you.
The photographs, I haven't yet had a chance to see the exhibition, but the photographs are also all black and
All in
white,
black,
right?
all
And
in black.
is there a reason as to why they're all black and white photographs?
Because of the time that they were shot in.
Which
They
was
used to take color photographs later, but they were not considered significant because the black and white photos were far more evocative. And I mean, if you see the exhibition, you'll make out. Yeah, their best work was in black and white.
Okay, so Lekha asked me to introduce this film, and I realized that most of us who will be watching this film are already aware of some of the obvious facts about the film, that it was released in 1944 and that it was the first full-length feature film of Bimal Roy that he made, even though he was involved with filmmaking, most spectacularly with the first Hindi version of Devdas with PC Burwa. But so I thought that maybe I could introduce this film by contexting the atmosphere within which this film was made. I just thought that it's interesting to remember how films were perceived. And I realized through my observations and readings that films in India, especially in the early days, had very two kind of opposing ways in which one looked at cinema as an activity, if I may put it that way. And um, the thing is, Indians became interested in film very early on. I mean, it's perhaps correct to say that, of all the religions in India, there are only two major ones, cricket and film. And it's interesting to also note that, street lights, for example, is a technology that took 28 years for it to come from the first time it was done in London and the first time it was done in India, actually in Bangalore, in the city market. It took 28 years before the street lights came, the technology came to India. But it took less than 3 years for films to be made in India after the first screening by Lumiere brothers. So, the love of cinema is almost hardwired into us, and the shift from performances platform from the stage to the screen was very easily made in India. But the way it was looked at is very sort of polarized. On the one hand, you have Mahatma Gandhi, who looked at films as the worst sin, much to the horror of the pioneers of filmmakers in India, who tried very hard to get Gandhiji to see some films. But in his life, he saw only one that was called Ram Rajya, which he said he hated, and he equated films to sins of gambling and womanizing and drinking, smoking. He's actually, one can quote him to say all of this. On the other hand, Nehru loved films. He loved Charlie Chaplin, and he understood the power of filmmaking. Like Lenin, he understood that films can be transformative. And he co-opted films into nation building, into the whole ideology of what he wants films to look like. And so if you look at the films up to the 1950s or early 60s, that is in the Nehruvian era, you find that films reflected this Nehruvian optimism, So you see that things are not okay, but you also kind of say, but it will be okay. Now that we are independent and now that we have the courage and the ability to do it, things will be okay. So in many ways, this patronage of films came from Nehru and his belief that in the process of nation building, in giving it some color, in giving it a direction, it is films that can play a very major role in this. He also kind of decided what the value system will be, and he was deeply influenced by socialism. And so you find that many of these films took up social issues of whether it's caste or class or the problem of distribution of wealth, the exploitation of the poor. These are common themes that keep coming up, whether it is an Achut Kanya or whether it is Dunya Na Mane, where you are actually looking at women's rights, women's position, you're looking at untouchability, and these become important issues. Many of them show stories that have a positive ending because you want to buy into Nehru's optimism for the nation. So it is in this context that we have to look at Bimal Royji's first attempt at a full-length feature, which he made in Bengali, Udair Pathe. And here also we see a very strong bed of Marxist philosophy, Marxist explanation of what is wrong with our world, because this is a class struggle. What I noticed is that this class struggle is not as simple as rich versus poor or an industrialist versus the worker, because the narrative point of view is somebody in the middle, an intellectual. And perhaps that reflected who Bimal Royji himself was, because he was born in a feudal world, but saw extreme poverty because of the way he was treated. And his family came to India from what is now Bangladesh, pretty much penniless. So he saw poverty firsthand, but he had memories of being part of the intellectual class, if not the privileged class. And you see that happening to the main protagonist in Udair Pathe, where the main protagonist is a writer. He's poor, but he buys books, and he has got paintings in his room of Rabindranath and such intellectuals. So the aspiration is intelligent, but the space is poor. There are workers, and there is, of course, the villainous industrialist there. The other thing that I wanted to just bring to your notice, if I may, is that this is not a Soviet film where you have a very clear division between two groups of people, the rich and the poor, the industrialist and the proletariat. I think it is something about the intellectuals of Bengal that is deeply influenced by liberal humanism as well, and believed in a kind of celebration of humanity, of liberal ideals that might not always parallel what Marx said. And so you find that the film, while talking about class struggles, also celebrates the individual. And the story also is a very sweet, romantic story. The romance is lovely. See, the thing is that there are many films that took the idea of a rich boy in love with a poor girl or a rich girl in love with a poor boy, but they become individual ways of trying to cross the class divide. But in Udair Pathe, there is the group, there are the workers who are going on a strike, and there is the industrialist and his coterie of like-minded hoarders. In fact, there is also a petty bourgeois who rents his house and keeps bugging the hero to pay the rent. So there are different levels of exploitation and the capitalist struggle. So there is that presence of, the backdrop is very, very Marxist, and a Marxist analysis of what is wrong with our world, what is wrong with our society that needs to be addressed. But unlike Marx, who never actually believed in the individual, he never said that the problems of society can ever be solved by an individual. But in Udair Pathe, we actually see the solution coming from a leader. And I think here we see some influence of Gandhi's non-violence, where in this, even in the middle of a revolution, in the middle of a possibility of strike, the hero constantly talks about negotiation, about a peaceful dialogue, and seems to be, in fact, the last conflict of, where he gives the speech, he's actually wearing a cap that kind of looks like the Gandhi cap, which is not exactly the Gandhi cap, but he's dressed in white with a white cap, which he has not worn in any other scene. So there is this very beautiful tempering of Marxist ideology with a liberal humanist Gandhian nonviolence negotiation that kind of balances it and makes Bimal Roy's film extremely charming. And I think in many ways, Udar Pathe becomes a kind of window into the films that are going to come, because whether it is Do Bigha Zameen or whether it is Sujata, where very important issues are taken at a class level, yet it continues to retain the love of the individual, the love of harmony, the love of beauty. The aesthetics is very important, both in the way it is presented, the love. For example, in Udar Pathe, there are beautiful songs, and there is a great appreciation for the song to say, you sing very well, will you sing for me again? And there is a differentiation between the so-called modern dance, who's dancing without much beauty, and the singing that is done very seriously. So there is a sort of aesthetic appreciation as well. So there's this acceptance of beauty as a part of that social change. Marx had, if I may misquote Marx a little, he had said that the purpose of philosophy is not to explain life, but to change it. The interesting thing about Bimal Roy's films, starting with Udar Pathe, is that he also showed us how. He points to what is wrong with society, but he also kind of indicates what would change it. Without further ado, let's see this beautiful film. It's enchanting. It's so old, and yet it is so riveting. I've myself watched it several times, and I hope that you will like it and love it as much as I did. Over to the screening. We can have a short discussion. I understand it's getting late. So if somebody has a question, if you will raise your hand, we'll bring the mic to you, and we'll take it from there. Perhaps we can start with the short remarks from both of them, and then we can direct our questions to them.
So the only thing I'd like to say, you've seen the film, the first film that my father made. The background is interesting in the sense that, as you know, he was a cameraman. And then he wanted to make a film, so he approached Mr. Sarkar. I think Mr. Sarkar was fond of my father, so he said yes, but he made a condition. He said that you can only use cut pieces, pieces left behind from other films. I'm not going to buy any stock from you. And they were busy making a kind of blockbuster film. So they didn't really pay attention. And when the film released, the big one, it flopped. And this one ran for 1 year. And it became a cult film. It made my father a kind of cult hero. And the dialogues, which you have, realized that they're very caustic and very kind of, they became such a rage that they were printed in the form of booklets and were sold from pawn shops. I think it's probably the first time that it ever happened. So yes, this film is a cult film. I think till today, most Bengalis, of course the older people do remember, but I think that it's a very significant film in every way. In Bengal, it's still revered, and I think there's every reason that it should be.
I have a mic. Yes, it's true. This till date, you will be surprised to know, for the first 2 days, this film was declared a flop. Suddenly it started picking up. And there are no stars in this film. It's the debut film of the heroine, who was a playback singer. She sang most of her songs, and of Radhamohan Bhattacharjee, and of course of my father, who also shot the film, by the way. And I was told by one of my father's assistants in Calcutta that till date, this is the biggest box office hit of New Theatres. It made 60 lakhs. In those days, 60 lakh is a lot of money, okay? And also, I consider this an extremely layered film. I don't know, I'm sure Joy knows. My father shot the Bengal famine at the request of the British government. And I've been told by my father's cameraman that people used to faint in front of the camera, asking for pan, which is the water from the rice. And they had to, many times they had to stop shooting because they were all so traumatized by it. And the British government withdrew that film. But I have seen the film. There's one copy of it in our National Film Archive with the Punjabi subtitle. It has survived. So it's very layered. You know, there's so many continuous reference to the Bengal famine in this film. So many references. You know, caustic references. He's saying just because, you know, you have stocked up so much rice, you know, our people have learned to be disciplined. You know, and when I showed this film in Chaplin Theatre in Calcutta, when I was doing some work for the Bimal Memorial, people were actually quoting the dialogues before the dialogues. It's remarkable. I consider this film my father's most radical.
And I think the interesting thing that I noticed is that the sarcasm is not only dialogue oriented. There's visual sarcasm. I don't know how many of you noticed that in the library while this man is saying that he's a great reader, he's sort of opening, and the book has not even been opened. And so it's a lot of visual sarcasm as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
And nobody stood up, but when the film started, people used to stand up. It's the Jana Gana Mana.
Yeah.
Yeah, a friend of mine stood up. But in Calcutta, wherever you show this film, people just stand up. And this is shot in 1944, before Jana Gana Mana became our national anthem. And I would also like to say what Shotyajit Babu said. He said this film, which I again noticed, particularly with one or two actors, just drove away the theatrical pattern of acting. It brought people closer to life, you know, which is so true. You don't get bored even today by watching this film. You know, maybe some, walking and all that, you know, you might seem a little odd, but the way they acted, when was it made? 1944, and today, watching it. I mean, there are so many things to talk about the film. And also, Joy, you said, when my father was looking for a hero, a lot of people at New Theatre says, why is he looking for a hero? Why can't he be the hero himself? He was very good looking. You know, at that time, he must have been much, much younger. Then my mother had a necklace after this film. There was an Udair Pathe necklace. So it became a fashion trendsetter at that time. And I was a kid, you know, but I have seen that necklace. So
But like this film says, fashion and culture are different things. Are there any questions from the audience that we can take? Any comments? Any remarks? That's fine. I think I see a couple of young people. Did you make anything of it? Would you say this is still relevant? Did you enjoy the film? Any comments from you? Shall we wait for the mic? Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the film. I was like you said, the acting was very realistic and it wasn't very theatrical. I was moved by the woman's portrayal, especially because it was such a nuanced role. It was layered, and also to see how a woman was treated in the household at that time. It was really enlightening and also at the same time very much relevant right now. That's what I felt about it.
I thought the dialogues, I don't know, the subtitling was terrible, but the dialogues were so beautiful. I think it was so powerful. So if you just turned a blind eye to the English and just translated it in Hindi instead, it would be really great.
The English wasn't that bad, just that they made spelling
mistakes.
Yeah.
It's a difficult film to subtitle.
Yeah.
Those cheeky, those cheeky dialogue, those sarcasm, very difficult to translate unless you know both the languages well. You know, I'm amazed at this one, sir. The villain's character, fantastic, and also that point I made about the appropriation of the copyright, which is so important. Somebody compared it to Piazza, similar theme. That even in Gurudat in Piazza has done that. People take away the credit, which is the most heartbreaking thing. I, as a writer, know, that, if somebody takes away my credit completely, that I have lost my credibility.
But Gurudutt has acknowledged Bimal so many times. I mean, Bimal Roy is a guru to so many
No,
people
I mean, in the film Piazza,
in the Piazza.
yeah, so he has tackled the same thing. It's like a continuation of that, when his poems have been taken away by his brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah? So that, in that sense.
Yeah.
Just one aside, my father used to call Guru Dutt Devdas.
Yeah, yeah. He considered him once, I remember.
I think almost prophetic, wasn't it? Any other comments or questions that you would like to share? Any last words from the two of you about Udar Pathe? We do have some amazing lineup for tomorrow, but something to wrap up today from both of you?
Thank you for staying.
Yeah, thank you for seeing it.
Thank you for watching and thank you for
It's not just me who think it's the most radical film. There was a retrospective of my father in Hamburg. They just could not stop talking about this film. We showed Madhumati, we showed the other films, but they said it's a creation of Bimal Roy. I mean, this is where my father comes from, and also it's written by him, photographed by him, which is a very difficult thing to do. I mean, that image of him tearing that paper and the heroine standing there, amazing.
Yeah.
The kind of visual that was, fantastic.
Also, I noticed that when the father and Arup are talking, they're moving in and out of the shadow and light.
Yeah.
What an interesting use of light and shadow.
And
So
the
true.
father's character, and if you remember Tulsi Chakraborty, the landowner, very famous artist, very famous.
I think he was the
actor.
only known face. Yeah.
Also Bhaduri, the man who played father, and who played the wife also is Raj Rokhe. Tulsi Chakraborty.
Yeah.
She was repeated in Do Biga
Known
Zameen.
comedian, yes.
Yeah, she was a very known comedian.
She's in Do Biga Zameen also.
She's there in Do Biga Zameen. Yeah. And of course, the music was given by R.C. Bodal, who was the first recipient of the
Yes.
Phalke Award.
Yes.
Yeah. And my father loved Rabindra Sangit. So except one song, all are Tagore songs.
Yes. So I think maybe we can call it a day for today and look forward to the wonderful lineup tomorrow. And of course, Bimal Roy doesn't end with 3 or 4 films. He has not only made amazing array of films that we better understand today than perhaps his own contemporaries did, but also his ability to pick talents who owe so much to him, starting from Ritik Ghatak to Rishikesh Mukherjee to Gulzar, if I'm not mistaken. Shubhendu Roy, so many. I mean, he had this amazing generosity to identify and nurture talent, and we owe him so much. I sometimes feel that we don't acknowledge him as much as he should have. I mean, we worship him, but he's even a larger figure than that.
You said about the generosity. I think he's the only producer who gave all his assistants a break.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked with a filmmaker who had assistants, didn't give a break. But I mean, I think that is really generosity of spirit.
That's so true. And I think everybody acknowledges that from all the interviews that I have seen. Almost everybody without fail talks about him as a wonderful human being outside of being a wonderful artist.
There are many backstories. There's not much time. But I would like to end by saying, you've seen Mughal Azam.
Can you hear her? Please, you. She's talking about some backstories.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Everybody's seen Mughal Azam. There is that famous song of Madhumala where you see all those little images of us. That was done by my father. No one knows. He packed up the shooting. He went. They could not handle it. They had to call him in. I mean, I cannot tell you the way this man knew this medium. My father was like a true pioneer in that sense, you know. And I read this in a book which is written by one of the directors called Torun Mazumdar. He went to meet my father that day and he found the office was shut. So he was surprised because my father was extremely disciplined. So he said, now Dada has gone to K. Asif's studio, right next to both the studios, Mohan Studio and K. Asif. And he had to help them do that. And I've heard this again and again, even from Tapan Sinha. You know, the way he would immediately come to, this thing, know the, exactly.
But what does it show? It shows in that time this kind of camaraderie and understanding. Now it's like dog eat dog or whatever, man eat dog kind of world. No, nobody is going to help any other filmmaker for sure. That's
when Ashit Sen was coming to shoot in Bombay, Baba asked him, he said, whatever you want, I will be there, my production is there, you can. Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Chalo, on that note, let's have a very good night for a very good director and look forward to tomorrow.
The film industry was very joyous and, of course, celebrating the independence quite a bit. If you read film magazines of the time and the journals like the Bengal Motion Picture Journal and the Indian Motion Picture Journals of the time, we'll see them congratulating Congress and celebrating independence and welcoming the new nation and all the nation building talk. But immediately that was hit with two roadblocks. One was that because the revenue was so less, the government decided to tax the entertainment industry. The entertainment tax, which was way lesser during the British Raj, went up almost about 5 to 75% was what 5 to 25% was the increase of the entertainment tax, right? At the same time, although the Information Films of India, the documentary wing of the British Raj was dismantled, a new documentary wing, the Film Divisions of India, was brought up, and which meant the theatres were again asked to compulsorily screen the official documentary sent by a film division before the screening of the film, right? In theatres, and the theatre had to pay for it, and that charge also went up, which was a problem for the producers at end because they were hit on the profits. If you look at 1949, the statistics say that about 60% of the box office went in tax. So the immediate joy of independence was hit with a lot of discontent amongst the producers everywhere. Bengal had a very curious problem, very different problem, that Bengal was divided because of the partition into East Bengal and West Bengal, which meant the 40% of audience of Bengali cinema was now East Pakistan, right? And because of the import duty levied on the films sent across borders, which meant that the producers could no longer afford to produce Bengali films. There was a sudden problem in the Bengali production world, which also affected the studios, right? And that's why the new theatres, the famous studio of Bengal where Bimal Roy used to work, it was mainly impacted by this partition issue. So you see how these sort of forces which don't seem cinematic at all are affecting how films were produced and what films were produced and who was making films and what kind of films, right? So that led to the closure, the eventual closure of new theatres in Bengal, and which meant that many had to migrate out of Bengal to Bombay, which was becoming increasingly the center of Indian cinema at the time. Pre-independence, Calcutta was sort of the hotbed, the new theatres, Devaki Bose and P.C. Balwa and all these people, and of course Bimal Roy later on. And but post-independence, the same studio system went into decline, and we saw the birth of many independent producers, right? New production houses, which because now people no longer relied on, they no longer believed that they needed a studio. All they needed was, some money to rent a studio and make a film. So unlike new theaters and Prabhat and Vadia Movietone and all those people who own studios, in the post-independence era, there were many producers who did not own studios. They just rented these older studios and made the films. And that's how the studio system started to break down because of these many reasons. Why I'm talking about all this is because it led to eventual migration of Bimal Roy also from Calcutta to Bombay in search of work. Although he is very successful with his film that he had made with New Theatres, which we saw last night, Udaya Pathe, right? But he couldn't, because the studios were declining, New Theatres were declining, he had to find some work. Through some of his connections, he found some work with Bombay Talkies initially in Mumbai, and then the film which Ashok Kumar was supposed to produce, and then eventually he went on to create his own production house, Bimal Roy Productions. And that first film of Bimal Roy Productions was Do Biga Zameen, then immediately we had Parinita and other films. So this was sort of the context of this whole industry at that time. I mean, I can read out to you just to give a little bit context. In one of the film journals, the editorial read, after the end of 1952, the editorial read, "Farewell 1952, the film industry in India will look back on you with regret and remorse. You brought the condition of industry from bad to worse. Poverty hit us relentlessly. Central Board of Film Censors, as an expensive government service fed out of industry's resources. We were forcibly taxed, both state and central governments, instead of helping us, come out of this situation, help themselves out of the dwindling resources of our industry. May 1953, look at us kindly." This is like a New Year editorial in the Motion Picture Journal of 1952, right? And of course, there was other things also, like Nehru instituted a committee called S.K. Patel Inquiry Committee, which was given the task of examining the whole film industry in India and looking at the problems and proposing a model of film production which will put Indian film on the world map, etc. And also at the same time be profitable for the government. So that committee's report wasn't implemented for almost a decade, even though the report came out in 1951, right? The talk, just to come back to a little bit about cinema, is that at that time Bombay cinema was very popularly led by what was known as Bombay Formula, because Bombay Formula in the studios and the producers of Bombay was very keenly, it was set in stone almost, right? So there was one or two major stars, many songs, few dances, right? That was the formula, and they kept profitably, repeating this formula for many years, and in 50s was no different. There were very few who stood up or who, let's say, went against this tide of Bombay formula in Bombay. The three I can think of is K. Abbas, who made some films with Raj Kapoor, like Avara was a big hit of 1952. Before that also he had made films like Dharti Ke Lal, which had won awards abroad, in Cannes, right? And then there was Bimal Roy. Bimal Roy, most of his films were rooted in the socialist ideals in 1950s, and hence he was also swimming against the tide of this Bombay formula. Then there was Gurdat, who was not really looking at the socialist politics and all that ideals, but was very much a modernist in the way he treated the individual journey. So 1950s, you can look at these three filmmakers, the very important filmmakers who swam against the industry at that time, the popular trope of the industry at that time, right? There are other factors also which influenced the making of Do Bighas Zameen. One was, again, very institutional impact, right? Jawaharlal Nehru's government made one of the plans out of the inquiry committee was to conduct the International Film Festival. The first International Film Festival in India was in 1952. It was in Bombay, also in Calcutta, I think later, Bombay for sure. And all these filmmakers who were there at the time went to these films, right? And went to the festival and watched the films. And what were the films we were? There was Rashomon, Baiko Dasawa, there was Bicycle Thief by Disika, all these films were there, which were very popular in Western. And immediately, people like Bimal Roy and his crew, which included Rishikesh Mukherjee, who was working as an editor and sometimes screenplay writer for Bimal Roy, they were all sort of hit by this foreign cinema. There was a huge influence of, especially the neorealism, the Italian neorealism. I don't know, if anyone doesn't know the term neorealism, it just means new realism. But it was a movement which emerged in the post-war Italy and then spread to the rest of the world. Basically, the cinema of neorealism can be looked at as very austere and the focus on the working class, plight of working class, and the moral dilemmas which sort of emerged from this tension of the post-war Europe, where there was immense poverty, unemployment. If you have seen Bicycle Thief, you know the famous last scene where he almost steals a bicycle and he's ashamed as his son watches him attempt to steal and get caught. Right? So those scenes had a direct impact, not only on Bimal Roy, of course, but also on people like Satyadeep Ray and others who were there. That was also there at Vikrant. So this whole group of people, so the film festival was another sort of inflection point, I would say, for Do Bighas Zameen. You will see as you watch the austerity and the socialist commitment which neorealism had being represented in the film as you watch it. The other possible impact, I would say, was IPTA, the Indian People Theatre Association. Many of these people were working for IPTA at that time, including Ritwik Ghatak, Rishikesh Mukherjee, and some others. And so that the whole people who were writing films, making films, Abbas was very much an IPTA product. So all of this, the Indian People Theatre Association, which was a cultural wing of the Communist Party at that time, had a huge influence on filmmakers and artists and other art forms as well, right? So there's an influence of that as well in this film, right? Now coming to the film itself, the title comes from a Tagore poem, actually, the Tagore poem of the same title. In Bengali, my Bengali pronunciation is very bad, so I'm going to just try. But Do Bighas, is that correct? Yeah. So that was the poem of Tagore, which means Do Bighas Zameen, which was the title that eventually was used by Bimal Roy for the film. That poem was if you read that poem, it is a plight of one farmer, him narrating his own plight, right? But what had happened before this, prior to this, was that the poem had been already adapted into short story by Salim Chaudhary, who's a very famous lyricist. Many of us will know his name. So Salim Chaudhary had adapted it into a short story called Rickshawala, which was, I think, also made into a Bengali film at that time, although I have not seen Rickshawala, to be honest. And when Bimal Roy was told about that, he immediately wanted to make the film and asked Salim to help him, and the film Do Bighas Zameen comes out of it, right? So it's the essence of Tagore's poem, the plight of the farmer or the peasant is there in the film, right? And then What is interesting if you look at the themes which the film explores, which you might examine while you watch. So I'm not going to like tell you the story of the film, but just the themes. This is also the time we have to understand that early 1950s was the first 5-year plan commissioned by Nehru's government, right? And it was a historic push to sort of tremendous push towards industrialization. You know, very famously, I don't know if you remember, but Nehru said, "Dams are the new temples of our country," right? So 50s, there were a lot of talk about industrialization, modernization of infrastructure and scientific development, which was eventually coined as the Nehruvian dream, so to say, right? Even if you watch Mother India, you will see that it starts with the dam inauguration, which Nagis is asked to inaugurate, right? So this is that time. So the push for industrialization was heavy, which also meant there were acts passed like the Land Acquisition Act. So if you have to build a public industry or dam or whatever, if there is agricultural land, that had to be acquired from the farmer. So that current was there, and so that this whole push of modernity and its tension with the lifestyles of Indian people at that time, especially considering we were largely agrarian society, the life of the peasant, and how the peasants saw this push of modernity was of industrialization, and what were the problems the peasant faced with this, because of this tension conflict between industrialization and agrarian life, is something I think the film deals with in a very humanistic way, right? At the same time, there's also, the film also sort of is a very interesting narrative or experience of migration from rural to urban, right? There's, and now we are very much aware of, especially how COVID time exposed the situation of migrant labor in our country, and it was, I would say, watching Go Bigger Zameen might also, take you back to the time when we saw the plight of many migrant workers during the COVID time, right? So, so it works as thematically also as there is a film about rural to urban migration. It's more or less what many scholars have called as dislocation, because you're getting dislocated from your social, place of, comfort to a new society, from a rural to urban. Right? And it's very interestingly, Bimal Roy himself had gone through a little bit, because he was born in Dhaka. He comes from East Bengal, and after partition, he had to, he was dislocated, right? And then he had to move to Bombay because of the economic circumstances in Bengali cinema at that time. That was another kind of dislocation, we can say. So Bimal Roy, you'll see that many of his films, including Devdas, and Bandini also, that we'll see later in the day, deal a little bit about these people who are dislocated from their natural social class, let's say. Right? So it seems, it can be read as something he was very deeply interested in exploring, maybe because of his own personal experience of being dislocated from his place of origin. Right? So these are the things I would say, tensions between modernity, tradition, agrarian society, industrialized society, what is good, what is bad, and also sort of the how the feudal system, which modernity is considered a force against this feudal system, but you'll see in the film that how the feudal system sort of morphed itself and sort of merged with the industrial forces in a way, right? So I think it also sort of is a big comment on that, right? This is pretty much about the themes. I think formally, if any of you are into film students or filmmakers, I think it's a great film in terms of one of the very early films which uses the reflex camera, which has a very the portability or mobility, high mobility. So there are some scenes you will see in the city that have been shot, which wasn't being done at that time. And Bimal Roy himself who started his career as a still photographer and a sort of visual artist, you can say, to who had moved into cinematography and then came to direction, of course, had much, I mean, he's, let's say, related to other directors, he's more invested in the visual language of the film. So there is, you'll see that the visual language is quite interesting, and Rishikesh Mukherjee has edited the film. He was an editor by profession at the time, and you'll see that it's the cutting of, creating anticipation in suspense, all that is, and the intercutting between juxtaposing, intercutting all these terms that we hear in editing. You'll see a lot of that done very interestingly through the film. Although I will say, with all these things about it, the film is not something we would say is a complete breakaway from the Bombay formula. It still sits within the framework of the commercial film of the time. There are songs, there is melodrama as a key sort of strategy in the film. But we have to realize that this is 1953 and prior to what is considered the first Indian real film, which is Patra Panchali. But if you read articles about Robiga Zameen at that time in film magazines outside India, you will see that it was called as the real Indian film. And it also won the international prize at Cannes, also at the Russian festival, Karlovy Vary Festival. I think they had an award called Social Progress, which it won. Right? So a lot of accolades outside India and also super rich in India, and it has become sort of the quintessential Bimal Roy film. When you say Bimal Roy, people say Robiga Zameen. But as we learn through the day, there are other films also to take note of. So on that note, thank you. So look out for these ideas, themes, and the filmmaking styles also. I mean, I guess we'll have to repeat some of the introduction we did in the morning because I see a lot of new faces. But the film we are going to watch, Bandini, is a 1963 film. It also happens to be the last fiction feature directed by Bimal Roy. Soon after he passed away in 1966, so it's a swan song, and what a swan song it is. I mean, it won a number of awards, and such a delightful film it is. But before we go to Bandini, just a little bit, very short bio about Bimal Roy. Bimal Roy started as a still photographer. He worked in what was then one of the biggest studios in India, New Theatres in Calcutta, in the 1930s. Then from still photography, he moved to cinematography. He in fact shot the first version of Devdas, which was directed by P.C. Barua in 1935. So Bimal Roy's photography, cinematography was quite popular because the Devdas was a super hit. Then he went on to do more cinematography for New Theatres. Eventually directed Udair Pathe, which was his first film, a Bengali film in 1944 for New Theatres. Directed a few more films for New Theatres, including a Hindi film called Pehla Aadmi. Then eventually, as we discussed in the morning, due to the the political and the socio-political conditions of the time, the film industry was in sort of a decline at that time because of the high taxation immediately after independence, and even the censor board used to charge quite a bit to pass the film and assign a certificate. And those caused, and there was also a huge black market at the time. The stars were paid quite a bit of money and quite a bit of it was in black, which also led, all these conditions sort of led to the death of studios. In a way, the big studios, they couldn't keep up with what was happening. So New Theatres declined. Even studios in Bombay declined slowly. Calcutta as a center, film center declined. Hence, Bimal Roy didn't have much work coming along his way in Calcutta, so he had to move to Bombay. So he made the move to Bombay and immediately had work at Bombay Talkies, directing a film called Ma. One of the first film he directed for Bombay Talkies. Then, again, we discussed this in the morning for just the sake of others. The first International Film Festival Indian, which happens in India as many of you would know, in November, December every year till now in Goa. It started in 1951. 1951 was the first IFFI, International Film Festival of India, right? And that is the time, and it happened in Bombay at that time. And that is the time when many Indian filmmakers like Bimal Roy, who had learned on the job in the studios, in the big studios, and remember, we didn't have film schools at that time, so there was no sort of filmmaking education available. So they had all learned on the job, but this exposure to European cinema and the world cinema in general through the first film festival had a huge impact on many filmmakers, including Bimal Roy. And first outcome of that was, of course, Do Bigha Zameen, which we saw in the morning, which was an immediate response to his understanding of the neorealism form, which was practiced by the Italian filmmakers in the post-war era. Right. While Do Bigha Zameen was quite heavy on the tragedy and melodramatic in narrative strategy, later on, the later films of Bimal Roy, especially Sujata, which came out in 1959, and Bandini, 1963, were very different to Do Bigha Zameen. They were very subtle. In fact, Bimal Roy is probably the first Indian filmmaker to use whose style was understatement, subtlety. So there's a lot of complexity assigned to the character, but the melodrama is sort of stripped off. So it's very interesting when you'll see this film that it could have been made this tearjerker kind of tragic melodrama, which we used to see at the time, especially in those 50s and early 60s. Bimal Roy moved away from that and preferred subtlety and sensitivity to his characters. Also, as as we have understood, he had a certain level of social commitment and socialist ideals because of his background in Indian People Theatre Association, being associated with IPTA for quite a bit of time. Do Bigha Zameen was about for the peasant crisis and the increasing urbanization and industrialization and the impact of it on the peasants. And then he also dealt with subjects which were very interested in studying the sort of the state of Indian women, right, or Indian woman. So Sujata is one where, I don't know if you've seen Sujata, but it has that very famous song on telephone, Jalte Hain Jiske Liye song, with Sunil Dutt singing on telephone, which itself was very innovative as a cinematic thing. And that film was focused on this caste, right? So this girl who was born in a lower caste but adopted by Brahmin parents, and then she falls in love with a Brahmin boy, and how the tension between the parents with her as the adopted child and the caste playing the overarching role is the film about. But it was very dealt with, as I said, very subtle and sensitive way, and the film was a super hit. Similarly, Bandini also focuses on the, as the title you know, it means the imprisoned. It focuses on the story of one woman, right, played by Nutan. I think coming to Bandini, the great thing about Bandini, I feel, is the three things come together. One is Bimal Roy's visual language, which is always almost excellent, but probably Bandini is his best visual film, I would say, in terms of how the shots are framed and how he uses mise en scène, like how the actors are placed in certain situations just to create a metaphorical barrier, so to say, if the situation requires that. You will see that a lot when the protagonist doesn't want to agree to the proposal of the boy. So then the shots completely are very innovatively shot, separating them both within the mise en scène, the arrangement of objects and the actors, right? And that is one, his mise en scène, his visual language, his photography, cinematography, shot by his assistant Kamal Bose, who had come with him from New Theatres to Bombay and worked with him, and he became eventually the cinematographer of Bandini. The other thing is S.D. Burman's music. Of course, many of us will know songs from Bandini, almost all super hit songs. So the cinematography, the music, the songs, and the acting of Nutan, I would say, probably the most astounding performance of a female actor in India for a very long time, I would say. You know, you should very restrained, very subtle, almost like holding back everything, and it allows you to feel the interiority of this person without relying on the external dialogues or external actions, just by Nutan playing those. Playing this character so well, right? So these three things kind of come together for this story so well. Although it stretches quite a bit in terms of length, it's about 2.5 hours. The story is quite complex, as usual Bimal Roy films are. As you will learn, it starts from a jail and she's a prisoner, and then we learn about why she's in the prison, and then she has to make some choices. What is interesting is Bimal Roy, when he had women characters, they almost always had a choice, although they would have probably, in the context of 2023, you might think that they might be making a very weaker choice, but still there was a choice which you would not otherwise see in the films of 50s, 60s. And I think Bandini is quite a good example of that. Right, and it's as with many of his films, it's an adaptation of a novel, a Bengali novel by this writer called Jarasandha. It was his poetic name. I mean, the writing name. I don't know what was his. I forgot his real name. That novel is adapted. It was adapted by his screenwriter friend Nabendu Ghosh, who was again a trooper of Bimal Roy, who came with him from Calcutta to Bombay. So it has this, very a team which worked together for many years and created a number of films. And the one new team member, which we all are very familiar with now, is Gulzar. Gulzar is the first time wrote lyrics for a song in Bandini. That was because of a brief, disagreement between S.D. Burman and Shailendra. They had to find one lyricist for a song, and Gulzar was already assisting in the crew, and she was asked to write a song, which was Gora Ang Mera Laile, which is even now a very famous romantic song. And so many things to look forward to. Hope you all enjoy the film, and if possible, if you are interested, we can have a discussion post-screening as well. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Am I audible? Okay. So we are ready for the last of the series, Madhumati, and there are so many little stories that one can tell to contextualize this film. We talked a little bit yesterday also about how films are seen and reviewed. There's the fabulous book that Rinki Di has written on untold stories of Madhumati. I'm sure that I can't top that. So what I thought I'll do is maybe I could offer you a lens of how we look at films at all. I think the tendency is to summarize a film the way we would summarize a novel, because we tend to reduce a film to its plot, its characters, its themes, pretty much as we would do a novel. I mean, you and I are not unique in this, or we are not to be blamed for this, because I think film theory as a whole was parented by literary theory. And so we talk about new criticism or structuralism or formalism about films pretty much as we do about literary texts. But I think that I will state the obvious, that there must be cheaper ways to express one's creativity than film if we are going to say it the same way. So the point is, how do we look at a film? Is a film doing something beyond the text? We have just seen Bandini. Before that, we know that Bimal Roy was very, very influenced by literary texts, brought so many of Sharat Chandra's novels onto the silver screen. We have Devdas, Parinita, Biraj Bodhu, all based on Sharat Chandra's stories. He's worked with very serious writers. In fact, Madhumati itself is a story written by Ritik Ghatak. So the basic literary value of the films that Bimal Roy makes is always there. But if you read the book and then you see the film, it is very, very common for people to say the book was better. There are very, very few good books that have been converted to a film where people will say that the film was better, unless the book itself is not great, in which case the film becomes great. So the point is, how do we look at a film? And I think what is important is to see the difference between a novel and a film. In a novel, you might have a sentence like, a girl walked into a room. But a film will tell you, this girl walked into this room. There is not much room left for imagination. So on the one hand, we lose out on the variety of interpretation that a book might have. You know, a book may be read by several readers, and different people get different things out of it. But a cinema is, in that sense, static in its truth, because it's there. You know how tall the girl is, what her looks are, what is her color, what is the clothes she's wearing, what is the, prop around the room. So there is no room for misunderstanding where films are concerned. Is that limiting? I'd like to say no. So on the one hand, you have the ability to clue in a myriad of information by going way past the sentence that a girl walked into a room in a film, because you're also making a statement about class, about gender, about choices, about things that are way past what the plot might need, because the cinema is like that. But I'd like to add another dimension to it, obvious dimension, obviously, which is that a film is also adding other elements of color, of light, of framing, of image size, of the way the camera moves. And all of this coalesce, come together to create messaging. So when we read or decode a film, we are not only, ideally, we are not only looking at the story or the plot or the character cohesion of that storyline or the narration or the probability, the realism or not, but we are also looking at how that story is being told cinematically. And I think that almost instinctively, Bimal Roy was a master storyteller visually. And it's not a coincidence that he began his career as a film director by preceding it with cinematography. He understood the visual medium exceedingly well. And because of that, he brought that into his films. You will see, you have already seen how he uses light in a black and white film. In Madhumati, for example, the first time Dilip Kumar walks into this spooky castle, he moves from dark to light. And the way the light travels with a lantern up the winding staircase, a lot has been said about a similar light brilliance of seen in Pathir Pachali, where Durga, the sister, is ill and the mother is anxious with a stormy night outside, and she carries this lantern. But Bimal Roy had started working with light well before that. I think it was Nutan in an interview who pointed out that Bimal Roy uses color, black and white, very colorfully. So I can perhaps co-opt that idea and say that he's the most colorful black and white filmmaker I know. The various shades of black, white, and the range of grays that he uses speaks a message that is beyond the plot requirement or the immediate need for the narrative cohesion. For example, in Madhumati, there's a point where Dilip Kumar arrives in this hill station for the first time, and he's singing Suhana Safar or Ye Mausam Hasi, and he picks up a flower. The whiteness of the flower, I hope that the screening will catch that. Those flowers are so white that you can't not see them. And you suddenly are aware of the beauty of what he's saying. And right through the film, the framing captures the beauty, the natural beauty of that place. So I think that the film is already very long, and I won't take any further time to introduce the obvious, the brilliance of Bimal Roy and the sweetness that that he has as a storyteller, the gentleness of his storytelling that is placed on a bed of things that mattered to him, the social injustice, the very Marxist ideology of seeing history as a clash of classes, of the haves and the have-nots. This is the bed on which we have not a violent film, not a violent story, but a very sweet, very romantic story. And many people have criticized the end of Madhumati, saying that it should have ended instead of a flashback, it should have simply ended as the story itself. But I think that that element of hope had to be underlined by somebody like Bimal Roy, where you actually see them together and say that, this is a love story that has crossed the mere boundaries of one lifetime. So without further ado, here's Madhumati.